In today's Dark Side segment, we take a look at over-the-counter derivatives and what some may consider unintended consequences of financial reform. Joining us today is Luke Zubrod, director of Chatham Financial. His firm is the largest independent interest rate and currency risk advisor in the world, and Luke leads Chatham's government and regulatory advisory team and has recently testified before Congress on the negative impact that Dodd-Frank will have on companies that use derivatives purely for hedging purposes. Luke, great to have you in the studio. Thanks for joining us. So reframe some of the issues here for us. Companies that are using these to hedge, you advise these companies. What specifically are they doing?
Sure. These are companies that use over-the-counter derivatives to manage their risk, really to remove risk from their businesses and to add certainty so that they can plan and forecast what their expenses will be. These are much different than the use of derivatives that's typically associated with the financial crisis, where AIG used derivatives to accumulate risk to the subprime mortgage market. And so really, coming out of the regulatory process around derivatives, companies were wondering, would we be treated differently than the AIGs of the world that use derivatives to manage?
Because when many look for the specific reason for the global financial collapse, but the derivatives that AIG was using are similar in structure to many of these derivatives, right? Although in terms of what they're actually doing, it is quite different. So how did companies get ensnared in this? And there has been some recent changes in terms of how companies will be treated versus financial institutions.
That's right. During the regulatory or the legislative process, it became a priority for policymakers to treat companies differently than systemically risky financial institutions. They created an end-user exemption, but there was some ambiguity coming out of the legislative process about just how that end-user exemption would translate. And the recent event is that regulators finally proposed rules. Companies were very much anticipating and waiting for these rules that would govern the margin requirements, the amount of cash that companies do or don't need to set aside when they use these derivatives to manage their risk.
And because public companies don't disclose how much money is being spent on hedging, it's hard to figure out exactly what those costs are. But what does it cost a company to hedge?
Yeah, well, currently many companies are able to enter into these contracts without having to set aside cash on their balance sheet. They are able to enter into credit arrangements where their dealer counterparties are comfortable facing them because they know that they're good for the future obligations. Under the new rule, every company, or virtually every company, would need to be subject to a credit support arrangement in which they needed to post collateral if the market value of their positions exceeded some threshold. So the ultimate impact is that instead of putting cash into the economy, building new plants and equipment, investing in research and development, that potentially any company now could have to have this cash set aside and diverted into a margin account.
Because of these regulatory changes, unfortunately, we have to end it there, but is there a key date in the future that we should watch for?
Well, I think that's very much a question on every company's minds right now. The official date for Dodd-Frank's rulemaking period to complete was July 15th. It's clear at this point that we won't hit that, probably won't even come close to hitting it. I think rules won't be completed until the end of the year.
All right, Luke, appreciate you joining us today with this insight. We'll have to revisit this topic, I'm sure, as more developments arise. That was Luke Zubrod from Chatham Financial. Well, coming up